What are we whispering about?
It wasn't quite a sandwich, actually. It was a fish restaurant. Anyway, I digress. For ages, I was saying, please, can I be a waiter? I want to be on the floor. And he finally gave in. And so on a Friday night, when it was really busy, he let me take over a section of the restaurant. And he stopped me mid-service and he went, right, tell me every single thing that's happening on your tables. And I was like, okay. So table 20 is mains away. Table 21, waiting for their starters. Table 22, blah, 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 blah. And as I was going through this, there was this like pink orb of like light that was like a bubble. And it just flew between us. And I stopped talking and I went, is that a fairy? And I think he thought I was just taking the piss.
In the air, by the sea, from the land, and within you and me. Fairies are whispering. Have you been coloured, confused, completely captivated, and craving clarity? This is Claire Casely, and I am a fairy whisperer. To catch a whisper, you have to listen closely. Listen with me. Hello and welcome to the Fairy Whispering Podcast. I'm your host, Claire Casely. My guest for this episode is my friend and comrade in all things pixie, storyteller Henry Everett. Henry shares about his love of storytelling and a personal fairy experience that he shared with another witness. There's lots of pixie mischief to enjoy in this episode. The tinkling bells that you'll hear in the background throughout our conversation are the bells on the collars of Henry's cats. I feel that this adds an air of pixie presence and mischief to the episode. To follow the show, you can find me on www.thefearywhispering.com, Instagram, and on Facebook at Fairy Whispering Podcast. And my YouTube channel is Fairy Whispering. We began with a bit of a giggle about my sound test for the episode. I'm sure you'll enjoy this delightful chat. Thank you for listening. Hello? Hello, hello, hello.
Hello. Hello. Hi. So I'm Henry Everett. I am a storyteller and a writer and an artist. I make lanterns, but I prefer to be telling stories about place-based spirits, magical things, particularly of the southwest of England, where I'm from. But I just love stories and love wonder tales from all over, but it's normally stories connected to the land.
Hello, Henry. How are you this evening?
Hi, I'm really good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Have you had a good day?
Oh, it's been a bit of a Monday, but it has been a nice day. Yeah.
Well, welcome to the Fairy Whispering podcast. It's lovely to have you on. We're sat in Henry's lovely flat on Dartmoor. You've got wonderful views, haven't you, of Dartmoor?
I do
Yeah.
see the River Dart outside. And there's not very much wall space left where I just cram it with things that look pretty and have a story.
Yeah. You've got your unicorn there and lots of magical things. And could you tell me a bit about how you work with stories and where you get your inspiration?
So it's always sort of being in the land and sort of outside is where I'm just returned to wonder, and you see a stone with a nose, or you hear the voice of a river or the laugh of a river, and suddenly I'm taken out of my mind and I'm pulled back, and so it's stories to sort of honour and lift up and celebrate the land is where it's all coming from, because I think we want to protect the things we love, and there are so many things that we love and we just take for granted. So yeah, I'm drawn to stories that are gonna get into the different ways of seeing.
That sounds amazing. And could you say a bit about your background and how you got into storytelling?
Ooh, well, so I'm from Dartmoor. I grew up on the south side of Dartmoor, and these sort of pixies and giants and witches and devils have always sort of been around in the landscape. But the thing that, and in many ways, I was a photographer, or still am. But photography was my first love, and I feel like that was telling stories in a way, or at least finding and like seeing beauty in things. But the way into the oral traditional storytelling, which I'm now doing, was I went for a walk one day with a friend behind Venford Reservoir on Dartmoor, and it was January and there was like loads of puddles, and I walked over this puddle that was crystal clear and like really quite deep, and there was a circle of stones in it and they were all nestled beautifully, and to me it was a dragon's nest, and I was basically sure it was a dragon's nest, and I took a photo thinking, well, yes, if there was a dragon on Dartmoor it would probably be very wet and granity. And then that night I met a lady who was a storyteller, and she said, what have you been doing today? And I said, I found a dragon's nest, as you do. And she said, oh, well, you were... Oh, reality. She said, what were you doing? What have you been doing today? And I said, oh, well, I found a dragon's nest, actually, on the moor. And I told her where I'd found it. And she said, you must know the folktale of the dragon that lived about a mile away from there. And it's funny because there was a nest in the story. And I just couldn't believe that what I was hearing. And I got goosebumps. And there was this old folktale of a dragon who lived on that bit of the moor. And people were fearful of it and stole an egg, and then the dragon went into this furious rage and no one could calm the dragon. And there's two versions of the story, but basically one of the versions is that they drowned the dragon in the River Dart, which I mean it was just amazing that there was this dragon egg and dragon thing, and my curiosity of walking through the land was just so amazed, because I kind of thought I was projecting what I wanted on the landscape with this dragon's nest. And actually there's so much stuff going on, and that draws us in with our imagination, and being someone who's curious of imagination and wanting to play with that through photography or stories or writing or whatever it is that's my creative output, I just became super fascinated with the relationship with story and land. And so, and this lady friend, Sarah Hurley, who's a great storyteller in Dartmoor, she said, you should come to a traditional storytelling circle. And there's many across the country. There's a whole scene of it. And she opened this doorway into traditional stories and listening, just sitting in a room with a story being told for adults, or for children too, but particularly for adults. It feels like it's medicine to me. You hear a story and you might not even fully take it on in your mind, but you do, of course, but it goes into your body and it does this thing, and it feels like medicine, and it feels like food, and it feels like it's some kind of nurturing nutrients. And so yeah, that's a very long-winded way of saying I love story.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and you were talking about walking with stories before we started recording. Could you say, you kind of touched on that, but could you say a bit more about that, how that helps your storytelling? And
Yeah. Well, so in my early days of when I first started going, okay, what is this storytelling thing? Because I could never think that I would be able to remember. Lisa Schneider, another amazing Dartmoor storyteller, said, walk with the stories, walk with them, and see how that how it deepens in you. And it really does. To take a story for a walk is an extraordinary thing. And I've for the last 4 years I've been working on Pan stories, the great god Pan from Greece. And I was practicing them in my room, and you get so far in it, well, I can only talk for myself, but when you're learning these stories you can only get so far when you're inside. When I started practicing them outside in the wood, they came alive with the trees company, and my peripheral vision was just going nuts, and I was getting all these ideas that felt like I was just being fed feedback from the trees, and getting much better ideas than it was coming up with inside. And so going outside with a story is a way to just get the whole world involved, because the whole world is involved in a story. When you're listening to words and someone is spinning a tale, and you're in that world, and that world, for it to be believable too, has all these other beings in it. And I think when we voice things for the trees and for the rivers, and we bring them into collaboration with the story, then they talk better through us. And anyway, so there's something about being outside and going for walks and working with stories outside that is now totally integral to how it makes sense to me to get to know these and get to experience what the story is.
I love that. Sorry to jump in there, but is there anything you wanted to say about that?
Well, I guess just that it's really exciting for me, because I think you can get to know the sort of the main bit of a story, but when you're walking through the landscape, perhaps maybe you'll come across mugwort, which for me is like a real friend of a plant. It always makes me feel happy. It always feels like it's this kind of I don't know, whenever I see it I just feel happy. And so if you're telling a story or practicing a story and suddenly you walk past your mugwort friend, it's a really interesting way for your brain to go, I don't know, for the story to incorporate that kind of feeling or that kind of thing, and then suddenly links your story. The story might have a link to something that it makes sense for mugwort to come in, or I don't know. It leaves open the imagination, to play with all these other imaginations. And I think that it makes sense for me that our imagination is a great receptor for the Earth's imagination to play with us. And of course they're gonna, all these different things, these elementals, these spirits, these things which are important to us and things which are alive around us, are gonna get our attention in whatever way they can. And if that's through a friendly plant or a stone with a nose, it's always stones with noses with me. I love it. If I see a stone with a nose, I'm like, oh, who are you? Who are you? And then suddenly it's like this ancient storyteller who's been on this earth for like eons, beyond what I can imagine as this tiny little fleeting bit of organic matter running around spewing out words. This stone's like, yeah, I've been here for like hundreds and hundreds of millions of years, just chilling out whilst the river, like, you know, cut its way through this valley, and now I just have a big nose. I love them.
I love that because I'm similar in that respect. I've noticed stones with little faces on. I talk to them. I'm like, where do you want to go? And I put them somewhere else.
Right.
I move them around. There was something that I read a few years ago by R.J. Stewart, the fairy guy. He's a fairy author, works with fairies, and he said sometimes the fairies want us to move things, like to pick up. You see a stick and you think, oh, I'm going to move that stick over by that tree or by the river, and sometimes that's the fairies' way of getting us to change up the resonance or the energy of the landscape of the place by doing that. So what you're just saying, I wholeheartedly kind of resonate with that, because I think that these little elements of nature, everything is so important, isn't it?
And if a stick has fallen on a primrose and the primrose is like, I'm just about to flower, then like, surely there's there's a human walking past with like some hands going around. You know, the primrose doesn't have the hands to take off a stick, and there's definitely there's something about listening to your gut and connecting into place and the environment that then can deepen you in place and leave you able to go, oh look, there's a stick, move it, and then the primrose is like, thanks. Or whoever it could be. But I know exactly what you mean. And
then we have to mention we have something in common to do with pixies, don't we?
We have a massive love for pixies, don't we?
So I'd love you to talk about your love of pixies.
Yeah, pixies are very important. I've been writing stories, and I've got a novel that's been taking me a very long time to write, but it is continuing, and it's a children's novel. But in that novel, I really wanted to use the characters of the landscape, and so I was like, right, pixies, they're all around the Dartmoor. What are the stories? And so about 8 years ago now, I went on a journey to find these stories of the pixies, and visiting the locations, which I know we both do, and it is such an enchanting way into the landscape for me, and following pixie stories and pixie places, and just having this character that is a representation of all the invisible. It leaves the mystery of everything so open to your daily walk, I've been looking for their stories to sort of see where the parameters of what their world is sort of to us, and it has taken me on such a magical journey, And I am currently writing up and retelling these stories for a book that will be out in September 25 next year, with the History Press, which it has been a really, really fun adventure.
Exciting. I'd love you to talk a bit about, to share about Pixie Place that you've been to.
Well, so I have just been for a week to Land's End, and there are loads of stories from Land's End. William Bottrell and Hunt, Robert Hunt, lived and had sources who collected stories around the sort of Penzance, Land's End, St Ives, West Penwith bit of the country. And so I went to loads of different places, and it was thrilling. It was amazing to see how close so many of these locations are that have stories. But there was one particular place that I went to, the Trevili Cliffs, which I went to on Midsummer's Eve, actually. And as I was walking along the cliffs from Nanjizzle to Land's End, it was like, I was just being lifted and lifted and lifted, and felt drunk or something. So happy. I took so many photos and videos, and I was like, this is a core memory. This is like a new core memory being unlocked. It's indescribably beautiful, and the sun was like shining on all these umbrella carroty people. I can't remember their name now. And it was all just stunning. And there was this point where the cliff path goes around these huge boulders of granite, and I was like, oh, this is one of the best bits of England or the United Kingdom I've ever seen. And it's the location of a story about a man who's a farmer of that area, and he gets lost along those bits of the cliff. This is why I went there. And he goes down to the coast because he thinks going down to the sea will like help figure out where he is along this cliff path. And he goes down, and there's this like dark tunnel, and he goes, oh, I'll go in there. So he goes into the dark tunnel. It all goes pitch black, and then he sees this bit of green light. So he goes towards the green light, and there's all this noise of like little people laughing, there's like a whole fete, or there's a game going on, and he walks towards them to find out where he is, and they're playing a game of some sort of ball game, and the ball comes flying towards him and lands at his feet, and he goes to pick it up, and then he hears a voice saying, don't pick the ball up. If you pick up the ball, you'll be stuck here forever. That's what happened to me. And he looks around, and there's this woman who's talking to him. She's hiding behind a rock, and she looks vaguely familiar. It turns out that she is his first love, who he thought had died, and she had actually just found her way into the other world, played the game, not able to leave. And so she takes him up, and they leave. She takes him out to an exit, which is through a cairn, which is an old grave, which I just love. And he goes, wait a minute, how am I going to go on knowing that you're still alive? And but you're in here. And she said, well, go on. And he said, but I'm meant to be getting married. How am I going to get married to this person now that I know that you're here? And she said, well, I don't know, wait for 3 years. And if you can't think of anything else, then don't get married to her. But I won't be able to leave. And so he leaves, and he can't stop thinking about her, and the marriage it's called off, and he turns to drink because he can't get back in and he can't find her. And so it's a bit of a sad story. So it's funny that when I was there, I had such a lovely time. But the next day, I happened to meet a farmer who was doing an open garden, and I was talking to him, and his garden was very nice, and he's a sculptor. Aidan Hicks is his name. And his sculptures are stunning. They're like these granite figures, bodies that he actually ploughs up in his land, and they're beautiful. And I was saying, do you know, you live around the most amazing pixie stories, And I told him all about my pixie research, and I said, there's this one story, and I told him the story that I've just told you. I said, yeah, it's about a man called Richard Vingo. And he went, what? Who told you this? And I said, well, it's in a book of like 150 years ago it was written. And he said, my grandmother was the last Vingo, and this is her house. So I was in the house that of the. It was just bizarre, and I feel like this is the enchantment of pixies for me. They always seem to pull me into the places that I need to be, and I mean, you know, it's the same with story. I'm pulled towards the stories that I either need to know for me, or I need to learn to tell because they're going to make sense at some point in the future. And so I love the mystery of both of those things.
Yeah, gosh, that's so amazing, isn't it? What an amazing experience. Isn't it, well, like you're just saying, isn't it amazing that connecting with fairies, these sorts of things seem to happen, these synchronicities. Yeah. Once you connect with them, they're like, it's almost like this two-way process that goes on.
Yeah. And particularly connecting with the land. I feel like it's all the stories that I tell. I want it to be for the land. I want us to, as a human race, to be like, yeah, look, or not as a human race. I feel like a lot of the human race already knows all of this. I think Western culture has just totally forgotten to honour the strange little weird stories of the spirits that are around us. And I think there's something profoundly important about these stories. And it's not that there's any one particular reason why, but it makes us into more full beings to be present in that space. And I think that these beings are really happy when these stories are being shared and when we're connecting into it, and I really get that vibe. Yeah.
Wow. Is there, you were talking earlier, I've just kept a mental note, Henry, about peripheral vision.
Oh, yeah.
And you were saying about things going on in your peripheral vision when you're in these places and connecting. Can you just describe that?
Well, I wish I was able to see more. I've always wanted to be able to see into these other worlds, but the glimpses I get are these like, it's like shadows jumping between trees. So those are sort of the ways that I describe things in stories of like a shadow broke free from the shadow of a tree, and you know, because that's how it is for me. It's like you get a little glimpse of something that's, I don't know, bizarre and like big. And I lived in a house at uni in Farnham where I'd stand in the kitchen and it was just like there was a thing circling. It was really weird, and like I would try and like actually see it, but I couldn't see it with my. It was only with the peripheral. Like it was like there and there, and there and there, and it wasn't a fly or anything. It was just always. It was often, at least, flying through the room. It was weird. It was so. Yeah, I get glimpses of things rather than.
Do you mind speaking about your pink orb experience?
Oh yeah.
You want to...
No, I haven't.
Yeah.
That was the most visual thing that ever happened. Was it? Yeah, I think it was. It was funny. I was at uni again, and I'd got a job in a fish restaurant, and it was a really busy fish restaurant, and I was at the bar. I was the barman, and we had a French manager who wanted women on the floor because he thought they would get more tips, and then men behind the bar. And I was like, that's a really boring bit of binary thinking, firstly, and secondly, why can't I get tips being on the floor? Because I can, I can upsell a salmon sandwich. It wasn't quite a sandwich, actually. It was a fish restaurant. Anyway, I digress. For ages, I was saying, please, can I be a waiter? I want to be on the floor. I want to be on the floor. And he finally gave in. And so on a Friday night, when it was really busy, he let me take over a section of the restaurant. And he stopped me mid-service and he went, right, tell me every single thing that's happening on your tables. And I was like, okay, so table 20 is mains away. Table 21, waiting for their starters. Table 22, blah, 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 blah. And as I was going through this, there was this like pink orb of like light that was like a bubble. And it just flew between us. And I stopped talking and I went, is that a fairy? And I think he thought I was just taking the piss because he looked at me like with this disgusted look and he said, get back to work. But I was like, no, really, what was that? Because it wasn't a bubble. It was in the middle of a restaurant. So I don't know what that was, but that was, it was really special, whatever it was. But yeah, it was a pink ball, like spherical and just floated in between.
How did you feel? Did you feel anything from that?
I felt like it was extraordinary. It took all of my brain. I was just like, there was no, let's be sensible and just ignore this. I was like, what are we looking at? Like it went between us. So I was like, you're participating in this. Yeah. So and then afterwards I realized that I probably shouldn't have even, that wasn't the best thing to say to your manager who was really not wanting you to even be a waiter. Anyway, it was wonderful.
That's so interesting, isn't it? Because sounds like it was quite a tense situation between you and your manager, and then this pink bubble of like joyfulness comes through. Do you think it kind of dissolved the tension in the situation?
It did, and it definitely let me not worry about this whole thing anymore. I was just like, oh, well, I mean, if I'm just in a ferry, then that's definitely way better than worrying about some job that's being a waiter at the end of the day. Like, it's there. Yeah. When you're gifted those little insights of don't worry, just enjoy, then suddenly the whole experience of whatever it is that's going on is just it is so much better, isn't it? I have had many little things throughout my life, especially after my mum died, where it felt like mum was just going, nah, don't worry about it, and then suddenly I wouldn't worry, and I was like, oh yeah, thanks mum, thanks for that was a really useful little bit of mum wisdom. Chill out, Henry. Oh yeah, you're right mum, thanks.
That's so lovely too, and yeah, thank you for sharing about that, because in a similar situation at the moment, and I know through my journey with my mum that this idea that fairies are connected with the dying. Lots of the stories you're talking about, the woman that had passed on and she'd been kept by the fairies. There's a few stories like that, aren't there?
Yes.
So they are very close to death, aren't they? They're that in-between place.
Yeah. I mean, there's whole strands of Cornish stories that are really alluding to the fact that it's the passed on ancestors, or in different ways, the passed on ancestors, or it's just the other world, and it is really interesting. I think, I don't know, that there's so many different ways, and I don't think there's one answer to all these things. I think it's like a great amalgamation of loads of different things where the stories come from, but there is a wonderful reminder to be like, hey, a life is alive right now, and I do quite like this idea that the other world is this place, like death, that you can't go to, you can't get to without a one-way ticket sort of thing. Like there's no return. And that reminds me to be grateful in this moment. But I mean, the story of the underworld and Greece with Persephone going down, and she couldn't come back because she's eaten, but then she is allowed to come back, and then there's this like renewal thing. There's this lovely dance between life and death there, but it feels so alive to me. And then there is this thing about story as well that says, there's a lovely African story that says there was a hunter who went out hunting and he died, and he didn't come back to his family, and his family were waiting, and his wife was pregnant at the time. They all forget about the father, and the baby is born, and the baby says, "Where is my father?" And so they all go out looking for the father, find the bones, they bring it back, and he comes back alive, and he makes this extraordinary object, and he says, "This is for the one who brought me back." And it's for the newborn baby. And it's basically, this story is saying that if you remember and tell the stories and remember the people who have been before, then they're not dead, they're still alive. And so through the power of remembering, through the power of story, there's this way of bringing people back from the dead, which I think is really fascinating, particularly when it comes to fairies and this idea of that it could be the connections to underworld things.
Yeah, this idea of remembering as well. I really feel and come to believe that our belief in fairies is a way of them reminding us of our connection and who we are.
Yeah, I think it's a really useful thing to have this this other neighbour who is so not bound to human morality, human laws, that is saying, hey, like, don't forget that you live on a planet with loads of life that you can't see. Like, hey, wake up. And for us, I think it's really useful to have and these stories of spirits and because they get you to focus on where you are, and they make a place, or they make a space into a place, I suppose. I mean, this world is so extraordinarily alive. We forget that. We just think we're the most interesting bit about it, and we go, oh, it's Tuesday today. No, it's not. It's like it's spiral through the freaking universe on a rock of like green leaves and flowing rivers. Why we think that there's not other things around us is bizarre. Yeah, that's why I suppose these stories and belief is such an extraordinary thing, because it takes you to amazing places.
Who do you think the pixies are, Henry? What do you think pixies are?
I think they're many things, actually. Many different ways which the stories have been used. For example, there's lots of stories that sort of warn you against going somewhere, and I think that's a very interesting way of going, hey, don't go to this place because there might be a smuggling route on that place, or there might be things that we don't want you to see there. I think at the core of what they are to me is spirits of place and of beings of elemental mystery. And so for me, there's sort of, I still don't really know if it's bound to elements, because it feels so extraordinarily not physical. I do wonder if, I feel like maybe all these different spirits are all these things. It makes sense in some ways that they're the spirits of ecosystems. For a long time, I've been like looking at the stories of the retreat of the Fae and going, why would they retreat? The sun is still there, the moon is still there to be worshipped. The rivers and the cathedrals of water droplets that make rain are so extraordinary. Like, why would you want to miss out on that? Even if these humans were like taking over everything. But from the like habitat loss and the devastation of what we have, you know, we've taken out so many trees and ancient woodlands. Idiot humans, because you can't replace that, and the memory of what has been in an ancient woodland is alive in an ancient woodland. So I think that there are things that want to get our attention, and it makes also perfect sense why some might be like, you're an absolute idiot. And you deserve to fall into this hole. And if you break your leg, oh well, never mind. If you don't, I'll try and drown you in a mire. I have a lot of time for the trickster. I love channeling the pixies because I think it's so good for us to be pulled out of the false sense of security that we know everything. I went to Australia and. On the very first day of being in Darwin in the Northern Territory, there was a sign at the beach saying great white sharks and jellyfish and saltwater crocodiles, and there was even like a type of plant that would like really sting you if you touched it. And there were so many things that pushed me off the top of the food scale, and then I went to the sea going, oh, I thought I was going to have a little swim. And there was this Aboriginal guy spearfishing in the water, and I was like, whoa, where am I? It was amazing, and it was so good to be pushed off the top of a food chain, because we're only on the top of a food chain in this country, in England, because we've killed all of the wolves, and we've decimated all of this extraordinary like life that would have been a threat to us. And so we are able to have a comfortable Tuesday or Monday or whatever it is, and lose ourselves in the days of the week, because that presence of very wild nature is not what it was. And so I think the trickster element of the pixies and spirit world and any kind of thing, really, there's many different things about tricksters in many different ways. So I don't want to make it neat and tidy, but this part of the pixie trickster quality reminds me to go, hey, you're not the top of the food chain. Not if like we bring back all the ghosts of the animals you killed. What would the bears say about that? Maybe they're going to come for you in your nightmares. My imagination wanders, but why not?
Yeah, the trickster is so fascinating, and I know that you've done a few storytelling shows about the trickster, and one last week, didn't you, about Pan? Yeah, wonderful to connect with that energy, isn't it? And like you say, it's just brings you back to what we are, where we are, what life is really about.
Yeah. So the Pan, I the last week I did Tales of the Great God Pan and Robin Goodfellow together, and it was really interesting to have them together. It's the first time I've done them both as like a full feature evening, and the Great God Pan is one of the only great Greek gods to have died and not have a resurrection story, and the story of his death is 2,000 years old. And that played into really interestingly, really conveniently, into the Christian stories of the Jesus dying and a new shepherd god replacing an old shepherd god, because Pan was god of flocks and shepherds and fishermen and pasture, and represented this sort of like multi pantheism, and then monotheism sort of followed with Jesus. And so paired with the stories of Robin Goodfellow, it was sort of it felt like we were exploring the death of wildness and our disconnection to nature, And then Robin Goodfellow, who's a really interesting fairy from Britain, medieval Britain. His stories were written down, and he has this disconnection to his father, Oberon, and a disconnection to his mother because he abandons his mother and his father has abandoned him. So he's sort of this free spirit in the world, not knowing who he is or what he is until his father gives him some powers and a letter saying, hey, you've got to abide by a little bit of moral rules, and here are some powers. You can transform yourself and you can wish for anything. And so these stories together were a really interesting exploration of what how the state of our connection to wildness. So I like where you can explore with stories and pairing them up like that. I love to put pictures up on my walls, as you might be able to tell, and I like to move them. And when you're moving them and you put these different stories together, suddenly things talk in different ways, and it's absolutely the same with stories.
Yeah, and when I arrived, you were talking about the horses' ratted manes.
Yes.
And then there was St. Teeth.
Oh, yeah. St. Teeth. St. Teeth as in teeth, not St. Teth as in death. Is the location where Anne Jeffreys lived in, I'm going to forget now, 1620? Maybe 1630, 1640, around those days. And she was a really interesting one because there's this account from back then, well, it's actually from 1690, when she was 70 years old, of an experience that happened when she was 20, basically, of having this sort of epileptic almost fit, and then six little figures jumped out of the hedge onto her, bringing about this condition, whatever it was, and giving her healing powers and foresight. And she was taken to Bodmin prison and jailed by the terrible Mr. Tregeagle, who has his own folk tales about how awful he was. Anyway, he was the justice of the peace, and part of her story was that she said that the fairies gave her food, and so she didn't eat mortal food. And he said, well, we'll starve you then. So in prison, they starved her for 6 months. And the fairies said to her, you just need to say this Bible passage. And which basically, I don't remember what passage it is now, but it's basically saying that trust the spirits and question the spirits, because some of them will be of God. So see which ones are visiting you. And I mean, her spirits were giving her Bible references, and in court she said that, and it's written down. They found a reference to this in Wales. So anyway, Tregeagle hated this, and so when they said you've got to release her, he kept her in his own personal prison for another 3 months, and starved her, and she still survived. Good old fairies. Anyway, I went to this St. Teeth, which is where she lived, and it was really interesting going there because I'd spent a lot of time trying to figure out how I was going to tell the story in the book I'm writing, because Robert Hunt has sort of there's an account that she didn't write actually at all. It was the son of the people whose house she lived in back in those days. She refused to give her account, which is quite so consent wise. She was like, nah, if I tell you my story, you're gonna write books about it, and I don't want my story told like that. And so her story was written down from the people she lived with, and so there's this account, but there's also from that came a folklore story, which is a very charming story about these fairies taking her into the orchard and dancing, and then she falls in love with one of them, and it just feels made up to me. I like the real, the account of what happened. And because there's this strange question over authenticity, over her consent, whether she wanted the story shared or not, I wanted to visit the place to kind of get an idea of, are you happy with this story being shared? Like, what does it mean now, 400 years later, when, you know, the story's been out there for 400 years, and to leave her out of the book would be rude. But walking around St. Teeth, it was bizarre because there were buildings that I had almost seen in my imagination. I was like, oh yeah, it was so familiar, and it was a really nice feeling that I felt at home there, or that I don't know. It was great. It was great exploring them, and I was pulled down old lanes which went towards mills because it just felt really lovely, and it felt like the story just needs to be shared with as much pluck and character that I can give it. So that is the direction I went. But yeah, it's good to go to these places and see them and feel them and see what talks in that place, because maybe that is you're being shown what to include, that what wants to be included.
Did you get any sense of Anne there, or any sort of sense of what she wanted to say about things?
There was a question of like, do I write the story or not? And after the day, I was like, oh yeah, it feels very much like it's a definite yes. I mean, the the story has been out there now for so long, and is also quite a historically important document. It's such an early and well written version, and because it's not her story, it actually gives quite a lot of permission to play around with it a bit more, not in changing the details, but it's really the story of Moses Pitt, who was the young boy when this all happened, who lived in the house. Anne Jeffreys was the working girl for this family. She lived in this. She was the serving girl for this rich family, and it was the rich family that then wrote the story down. And so there's been different ways in which I've written and explored how I tell the story, and there are some. Yeah, I've been taken into a particular direction with it. So I hope I do Anne justice. But yeah, it was interesting what the stitch war in the hedge was what spoke really loudly. It was like, it was everywhere, and it was like Beltane time. But it was like there were pixies everywhere going like, yeah. There was massive abundance. So, yeah.
We're just surrounded by stories, aren't we?
Yeah.
In this part of the world.
Yeah.
And particularly pixies, because I mean, pixies. So from the research I've done, it seems that pixies are mostly a southwesterly thing. From Somerset, Devon, and Cornwall, there are place names in Hampshire which have pixie in them. And the New Forest, and there's a cult pixie, which is a little like a baby colt, a baby horse that lures people into a place in the mires, and then or not people, sorry, horses, and it would lead them into a burial cairn, and they'd go into the other world and never be seen again. But it's said that that's slightly different from a little dwarfish, elfish, hobgoblinish creature, which all the Southwest stories seem to share. And I feel like it is quite lucky because that we live here, because they became such a globally recognised member of the fairy family. And they moved over the knockers. There's American knocker stories where the stories moved with the miners. I love the idea that there were these little knockers sitting on the shoulders of the successful miners who were off to go and like explore a new world. And they were like, "We're coming!" But I think the truth of it all is that everywhere has stories of the spirits that live in that place, and everywhere has these extraordinary things. But pixies particularly were made famous by Anna Bray, I believe, in the 1830s, and became their own iconic little bits of mischief. But the brownies and the red caps and the hobs and the hobbity dicks and all the rest of it, they're just, it's fascinating. I think Britain is quite an extraordinary place for all of those names. I mean, so is Europe, and so is the whole world. There's all of these little pixie, dwarfish, elfish things can be found everywhere. So it's not that one place is special. The whole world is extraordinarily special.
Thank you so much, Henry, for sharing your stories with us and talking with me tonight. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you, and it's really fun.
Thank you for having me. It's been really lovely to sit with you and share. Thank you.
Where can people connect with your work and what you're up to?
So I am Henry Everett on Instagram and Facebook, the ways that I talk to the outside world, I suppose. And on my website too, henryeverett.com is where I'll post events and storytelling news and workshops and things. So Instagram is where I enjoy being the most. So come and talk to me on Instagram because I'm more likely to be on it. Yeah, that's where the majority of Pixie stuff will be shared and is shared, and especially in the run up to the book, there's going to be lots of stuff predominantly put there of exploring these different locations where pixies, the tales come from, and any wonder that happens along the way.